Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets continue their winning ways, this time taking down fellow tankers in the Charlotte Hornets. We break down what it looks like with one less ball handler, Day'Ron Sharpe, and old school big ball basketball as we dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms and remind you to go check out the newsletters across the entire Locked On Network with the free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. And Doug, just a 97-89 scoreboard doesn't even tell you the full story here. Nets effectively blow out the Hornets in this one. Kind of expected, I think, coming off our last episode where we talk about effort, Jordi Fernandez, and expectations for the final 30.
Yeah, look, 97-89, and as you mentioned, it was not as close as that. Nets only put up 12 points in the fourth. This thing was well over for a while. LaMelo did get hurt during the game, so they lost effectively their best player. Hornets, we know, are pretty much a mess, and the Nets eclipsed their season win total that they came in. The preseason win total was 18.5. Got bet down to 18, and I think it started at 19.5. Got bet down to 18.5. They're going to crush this thing, and I think this marks every year since we started doing the podcast that I've been wrong about the season win total. Happy to take the L's along the way. Happy to victory lap the W's too. Obviously, we'll shout the W's from the mountaintop. That's but right. I'm nearly positive that I've been wrong every year on the high and low side of the season win total, and this year might be the worst one yet because they're going to kill this thing. They're already at 19 wins, and it doesn't look. I mean, maybe they go on an epic losing streak now over the last 29 games. But as we saw from this team, like you said, it's just too much effort. And the defense, which we'll talk about here, has just really gotten dialed in to a point where I just wish Jordi Fernandez had been the coach for some of these years when it all fell apart. It's hard not to think about how this would have changed it. They talked about it in the broadcast as well. So a lot to talk about here, but in general, high level, wrong again. Nets are going to crush the win total.
And I think my saving grace on getting the over, quote unquote, this season is because it got kind of shifted down there before the season got underway. Originally, you and I were talking about, it's like, well, if it's 20.5, you take, I was like, oh boy, that number. But when it got down to, I was like, oh no, you got to crush the over on that one. Not remotely thinking that it was going to be this type of season for them. It's funny too, because you mentioned, let's get that out of the way here in this moment, just in terms of the high level. Because for a team that, and I don't think we'll do too much of this as we wind down the last 29 games now of the season, reflecting, right, and talking about what coulda, shoulda, would have been. But when you look at Cleveland and you see how successful they've been this season, different coaches, different strategies, different mentalities, but he was here, right? And this is like a little bit of the classic Brooklyn Nets do have a hard time sometimes making the right choice, even in the best of times. You have them. But you're too concerned about the egos of superstars and whether or not they'll be satisfied. So you start to just kind of throw whatever sticks at the wall. None of those coaches over the last 2.5, 3 seasons are coaching at a head coaching level now in the NBA. You get Jordi Fernandez, and then you think, boy, I wonder what would have happened had we had a guy who, by the way, I think this is a failing for a lot of organizations. There's not enough trust if you think you have the right coach to say, they'll figure it out with those superstar talents. They'll be able to communicate, hey, I'm going to lead to more winning basketball, right? Like that's the goal here, isn't it, guys? And probably the proof ends up being, on the court and in the wins. But you don't risk that. You put these other guys in there, and the Nets don't have Jordi Fernandez, who, I mean, good Lord, over win total this season. Who knows what he would have done? Probably would. You know what? He probably would have had Kevin Durant get a smaller shoe. That's probably would have been the difference.
Well, let me remind you, Adam, that it was a mutual decision for Kenny Atkinson and the Nets to part ways. If you remember the reporting, that was mutual, okay? It was a mutual decision.
This is a mutual parting of ways. I don't want to coach the superstar team after dragging this ragtag group to the playoffs one year. I don't want to be a part of the good times in Brooklyn. I just want it to be the slog.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things. Like, Richard Jefferson said it on the broadcast last night. Yeah, I just love it. I love it. It's like mutual. Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm sure everyone just sat down right at the exact time, same time, and we said 1, 2, 3. We'll all say what we want. And they all said break up at the same time, and it was
1, 2, 3,
was
break up.
yeah, exactly. Richard Jefferson said it on the podcast last night, or it's not podcast, we're the podcast. He said it on the broadcast last night, and we said this before Jordi Fernandez even stepped on onto the bench for the Nets. We had a high level of trust that he was going to be able to bring sort of like a winning culture, because we said it that he had, I don't know, decorated story. He had as great an assistant coaching resume as you could possibly have because of what he had done with Team Canada. And it was like, okay, yeah, he's not front of the bench when it comes to the Kings behind Mike Brown, but he went and coached the Canadian national team in high leverage games with superstars already there. Here's the key. Jefferson said this exactly too. It's like when you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jamal Murray and these guys, like you're already good at handling the other part that's really important in the NBA, which is dealing with these dudes. It's one thing to X's and O's, and it seems like Jordy's got a great handle on this. And you also have to have this other thing where it's like you're also just sort of ego manager. And I say that not pejoratively. Like these guys all have egos. That's how they got there. Like you can't get to the NBA without a massive ego. Like it's like literally impossible. You have to be so driven and so focused on like playing basketball that basically without a huge ego, I don't think most guys could get there. So it's not even a knock. Like you need this thing. It's a prerequisite. And Jordi Fernandez
being Jordi Fernandez, right? Like you have to have an ego to be a head coach in the NBA, right? The highest level.
Yeah, of course. And then be able to manage it and be able to be sympathetic and empathetic and hard nosed when you need to be and all the things, right? It's different for everybody. But in general, we felt really confident with Jordi coming in because it was like, well, we don't know exactly, but man, I'll tell you, it's hard to get a resume better than this. Like even like G League coaches and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, well, they've gotten in-game stuff. It's like, yeah, in-game stuff with G Leaguers. You get in-game stuff in the Olympics. It's just such a huge difference. And it's just showing here this year. And it's hard not to feel a little bit like, I mean, look, it wasn't possible. It wasn't like they turned him down to be the coach during these times, but it's hard. Like what would have been different had they had a stabilizing force like this during the time? I'll just say it like that. Like a person could have stabilized everything during the time, because that's clearly what they didn't have. And you mentioned before, Steve Nash and Jacques Vaughn are, and I mean, maybe Kevin Ollie, that was too short. Those guys aren't getting another head coaching gig, right? Like they're like, those guys are not going to be head coaches again. And I don't know. Yeah, it's up. And the Nets story is what could have been, but Jordi Fernandez, it does look like, thankfully, it's solidifying with each game that like they found the dude. Like they got this one right.
Yeah, and of course it has to come at what some segment of the fan base would say the most inopportune time when it comes to the agenda. But staying inside of this game, coming up here in a second, we're going to take a look at what the defense has been lately, whether or not we think that this is a product of who they've played, because they're going to have some more difficult matchups coming up on the schedule. And then we'll get into Day'Ron Sharpe. Boy, this guy knows how to turn it on. If you're going to play old school basketball, why not go to Day'Ron Sharpe under the rim? We'll get into all of that and other key performers here in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering, refreshing the space, helps you get back into a routine. Maybe you're tidying up, clearing out, just want to give your space a new look to start the year. Wayfair is everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture. The huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and my budget. Actually, right behind me, you're going to see eventually. I'm just trying to find a chair. I'm finding just the right chair to fit into this space. It's a little space. I'm not going to take you to walking tour of the office right now, but behind me, we got a little thin space. Wayfair is going to help me figure this out. I'm just confident with it. The free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items. This one's going to be a little larger, so we're good there. Wayfair's site is so easy to navigate. Going to find everything I need in no time. There's something for every style, every home, no matter your space or your budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the 97-89 win over the Hornets, we can take a quick peek. We're going to do these updates, even though I'm going to continue to caveat and say, like, this isn't going to be the lament over these last 29 games. We'll see how things go, because, by the way, I did say that if you look over the next 15 games, I set the win total at 5.5. They've got one. So, we'll see how it goes here as they play some of the tougher teams. But with that win, 19-34, Philadelphia now 20-32. They're probably going, or trying at least, even though they've lost 3 in a row and they've got all their problems, maybe trying to go in the right direction as their pick will convey over to OKC. You assume Chicago, Portland, 22 and 23 wins respectively, are going to also be in the mix. So who knows? Maybe Brooklyn ends up falling even further up the board, potentially maybe as high as 8, we could say. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. But inside this game, Doug, and in recent games, as you talked about last episode, it's been the defense for the Brooklyn Nets that has come through in big ways to help shut down opposing offenses.
Over the last 10 games, and they have, they've won, 5 of the last 6? Over the last 10 games, the Brooklyn Nets rank number 1 in defensive rating in the NBA. It's the Nets, the Lakers, the Thunder, the Raptors, the T-Wolves, the Blazers. I mean, the Nets are easily number 1, too, like 106.5 off defensive rating during that stretch. Weirdly, it's hilarious. This is a great stat. So they have the number 1 offense, or excuse me, they have the number 1 defense in this stretch, and yet they still, by far, and they still have a negative net rating during that thing, which just tells you how the offense has been. And then it kind of shows up in this game too. It's like, well, we're going to win 97-89, but 12 points in the fourth quarter, and we're not going to, eclipse 100 points again. And so the team can't score, which was our biggest problem, our biggest concern going in, specifically, related back to the win total, shows up in this game here. It's like, well, how are they going to score? It's like, well, they can't, but it turns out
they're not going.
they're not. Well, they're just not. That's been proven right. Like that part, the part of the thesis where the Nets win total was going to be bad was based almost strictly on the fact that the offense was going to be totally brutal. We've been mostly correct about that. It's that the defense has been so good over stretches of this season that it's somehow making up for it. So we see this again in the game tonight. Last night, they just were able to really dial it up. It's against a completely overwhelmed Hornets team. So it's not like they're playing, the dream team here, but in general, this has been a theme over the last 10, 15 games, specifically over the last 10, where the defense has really gotten to go. And they spread the offense around. We can talk about Day'Ron Sharpe a little bit, but overall, they're buying into a defensive scheme that is working, and they have the length, in defenders, and especially guys coming off the bench too, that are able to incorporate this between Claxton, Zaire, Trendon Watford is able to get there too. Even Keon Johnson's done a pretty good job holding his own. And that's just kind of what they're making their bones on, because usually with this kind of offense, you would just be completely dumpstered every single night, but the defense has been able to step it up.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, players like we talked about Nicholas Claxton throughout the course of this season, and he hasn't quite looked the same defensively and all around. I mean, this is a game where he, in 24 minutes, was 8 of 13 and gave you 16 points to go along with 2 steals, 2 blocks. Remember, in the seasons past, those were a lot of familiar kind of stat lines, the multiple steals, the multiple block games for him, and then just the eye test really, taking care of it for him specifically. But I'll just real quick on Keon Johnson, because you mentioned his name there. You go back to the start of the year, he was a guy that is part of his identity. Part of his identity is being a pretty pesky, kind of gritty defensive player. But when you don't have a lot of offense on your team and you keep looking to him, by the way, he was 2 of 12 from the field and 1 of 6 from beyond the arc. So it wasn't a good offensive game for him, but you can still rely on him to do some of those things. And I'll tie it back to the top with Jordi Fernandez. It's hey, you're going to go out there and have some ugly shooting nights. But if you do these things on the other end of the court, and you help this unit overall have success, then we can actually find a way to navigate ourselves towards wins. You mentioned Trendon Watford too. I think he's really noteworthy here for multiple reasons before we get to Day'Ron. Not only does he have 4 of 8, 3 of 5 from deep, gives you 13 points, gives you 4 assists in this game. I highlight him because we always referred him defensively as an energy guy, has some length, can certainly be disruptive. But the other side of it is you got rid of Ben Simmons. And just notably, he does handle the ball. Ben Simmons did handle the basketball for the Brooklyn Nets when he was on the court, when he was healthy. We always said this team lacked ball handling. So having Watford, it kind of matters for whatever this offense is going to be. And last night, not particularly pretty. Spent the first, 14 minutes being a bit of a rock fight in a lot of ways, despite points going up. You're going to need players like that as well. Thoughts on any of those guys in their roles going forward before we talk Day'Ron?
Well, I mean, I know we're going to talk about Day'Ron. Watford was really good. He took some rhythm threes, which he always is a bit of a line drive shooter, so I kind of never feel like it's going to go in. But then last night 3 for 5, and 2 of them were I mean, these weren't like just stand in the corner threes too. The two specifically that jump out are the ones he made above the break where he's kind of pulling them. One was well beyond the arc and he was able to knock it down. Again, not the prettiest thing in the world because it is a bit of a line drive, but overall, like if he's able to do that, then we know that he's versatile enough in kind of the rest of what he does to be able to stick around. So it's always just kind of been like, it's with everybody with these Nets guys. It's like, can you shoot enough? Can you shoot enough to kind of hang around long enough to be good? Watford in previous years had been there, right? Like not crazy high volume, but he was shooting like around 40%. Now only on an attempt a game. The attempts have gone up a little bit since he's been back, or basically doubled almost. And the efficiency hasn't been there. Last night he knocks him down. He's still only at 32%. He can do everything else though, and that's why we've always been like higher on him. Is because if you watch him play, you're like, okay, it's kind of like with Tosan too. If you watch these guys play, it's unclear exactly what thing they do great, but it's also unclear what they do poorly, right? And I think with a lot of times we mention this with guys, it's like, well, he does this, and this really well, but then when it comes to this thing, it's so brutal that you just can't really make a strong case for it. With those two guys, Watford specifically, we've always known it's like, well, there's a little bit of ball handling, there's good court vision. He wants to get to the rim. He is strong. He can hold it defensively. He's not super athletic and he's not super quick and he's not a great shooter, but he's not horrible. You know what I mean? It's like this whole list of pretty goods or okays. But that in the NBA matters. It matters if you're okay at kind of everything, and just not horrible at everything because you can stay on the court. Now it's hard to see the ceiling with these dudes, but it's hard to see the floor too. And I think that just kind of, I mean, maybe I'm just like defining a role player, but that actually is not even true because usually with role players, we're talking about a guy who does one thing specifically well. It's like, hey, their role players to shoot, or their role is to just play lockdown defense, or their role is to, sort of be a game manager. But with these guys, their role is to not suck at any one specific thing, right? Like that's kind of the role. And I think especially for a team like the Nets, it's really important.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I don't know. Like you look around the league and you think, well, maybe how many guys and opportunities are there where, yes, you are a role player and you're thought about being this very specific thing. But maybe if you were just on a team that had lower expectations or had a lower talent level across the board, and you got bigger sample sizes, and this like Keon Johnson, bigger sample size, well, the shooting's still going to be rough. Okay, right, Tosan, maybe there is a little something there. And even a guy, as you mentioned, it's funny, the player that isn't really in this group, well, I think he is, but he has a higher profile earlier in his career, Zaire Williams, right? Like we talk about him all season. If he can just get the three-point shooting to come around, because by the way, this defensive bunch that we talk about and the way that they've played defensively, Zaire has been so important to that. And his one thing is, can you get that three-point shot to come around? Because you're maybe not fully athletic enough offensively to be a guy who's taking anyone off the dribble, but that falls into this group too, right? And then you turn around and you've got 6 guys in double digits in this game. And you had Zaire, who was 3 of 8 and 2 of 5 from beyond the arc, which is like enough for him. And the other part too, just to tie it into defensively, they had 10 steals total in this game. Now, on the offensive end, somebody had him here. Jalen Wilson jumps out here, but I really thought it was only D'Angelo Russell with 3. Early in this game, I thought for sure that Trendon Watford was maybe going to have like 13 turnovers in this one because he has a little bit of that, offensive, I'm going to say flair when it comes to trying to find some guys. And he had a couple of passes that looked a little ugly, but they were sloppy with the ball themselves, but they also forced it the other way for the Charlotte Hornets. And I think that's the nature of games like these, 2 relatively bad teams going at it. And maybe it's just this collection of guys the Nets have that continue to outshoot their projections, right? They can continue to outperform expectations. That's enough. Like that's enough when the best player on the other team goes down and you're kind of kicking your way through this on the defensive end. Coming up here in a second, though, we've been talking about him somewhat frequently over the last month of the season. Day'Ron Sharpe. He's putting together some nice games here, and there was at least some conversation, some low-level speculation, even from me, that maybe teams will call about him around the deadline. Let's talk about him coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Open Phone. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone. Before you know it, you're juggling customer calls all day, all night. And as your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It's the number 1 business phone system designed to keep your work and personal life separate for just $15 a month. This costs a few coffees. You get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer, integrates with tools like HubSpot, you like to hear that, or hundreds of others. and also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. If you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA for 20% off 6 months, your first 6 months. OpenPhone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. Go to openphone.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, and to tie a pretty little bow on the Brooklyn Nets 97-89 win over the Charlotte Hornets, we focus in on for this closing segment one Day'Ron Sharpe, 14 and 9 in 19 minutes, 7 of 12 from the field. And again, if you rubbed your eyes and you were sitting there on the couch, maybe you nodded off before the game started, you might have thought, we watching like 90s ball? Because the one thing that we've talked about with Day'Ron Sharpe in the Brooklyn Nets is you can never figure out if he fit what they were doing, if he was, a part of the operation, back to the superstars as well. He's not athletic enough to really be a rim runner and all those things. And then last night you're reminded, right, like they were specifically designing offensive sets to get him in the low block, back to the basket, feed him, and amongst one or sometimes two defenders, just go ahead, Day'Ron, like try to physically get yourself at the basket and put some things in the hole. Like, I think this is another example of Jordi being like, so what do you do well? Okay, that's what we're going to have you do, rather than maybe sometimes forcing square pegs into round holes.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like a big body. It's going to not fit in every scheme, but nope. He does certain things well. He's gotten more comfortable around the basket. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him in the offseason here. And he's just an absolute menace on the boards. Like especially the offensive boards, he's just among the very best in the game. 7 more rebounds in this game. And times where he just completely overpowered guys in the interior. Now, the Hornets were playing with like Diabate and nobody else, like, 97-year-old Taj Gibson, basically as the centers in this game. So take that for what it is. But still, this is something we've seen time again, that Day'Ron is just very, very good at understanding rebounding, right? And I say understanding rebounding because you can be big and not rebound. Like we've seen the Nets have a guy like the Noah Clowney. That's now some of that's schematic, but like he just, he hasn't been rebounding at high numbers this year. Day'Ron just continues to be among the very best of having a nose for the angles of the ball, specifically in the offensive end, where other teams just maybe are either forgetting about it, or he's just so good at understanding sort of where the ball is coming that he's able to do it. So 7 offensive rebounds to 2 defensive rebounds is a wild. Am I seeing this right? Yeah. 7 offensive rebounds to 2 is just like a wild stat when it comes to just the breakdown of what you're doing. And I'll be honest with you, it felt like more. Like when you watch the game, it felt like it was even more in this one, because he just seemed everywhere at that end clean. It was really the big reason that they were able to pull away, because if you're going to get this many offensive rebounds and second chances, you can just win games. And because like that, you're just creating just more and more and more opportunities, especially when he's looking comfortable on the finishing end of things, which has been a problem for him. Like the hands are not amazing when he gets the ball, but he was finishing softly at the rim on these offensive rebounds. So overall, good game from him. It's going to be fascinating to see what they do with him in the offseason. I suspect he's back on like some kind of lower deal, but it's one of these like sort of question marks around what have they always thought about him. Yeah, it feels like they should keep rolling with it, but I don't want to overstate it, because I've, again, in the old been wrong about this stuff. It's sometimes just hard to know exactly how these guys feel, how they feel about certain dudes.
And it's fun. I mean, like, he's only 23 years old, right? Like, so, I mean, there's still, you think about the draft class and having a lot of more bodies come in, but he's, again, one of those younger bodies that in theory, well, maybe he's just starting to get into some of that developmental area where you think he can have an impact. Again, plays 19 minutes in this game, so it continues to be interesting to watch how big of a role he has over the next 29. I'll just say, to somewhat close things out here for myself, I don't care, even being the Charlotte Hornets, when you have 2 players in D'Angelo Russell and Keon Johnson who combine 6 of 24 in a game and 2 of 13 from beyond the arc, like it still is pretty impressive to be able to go out and win a basketball game like this, right? You look at Cam Johnson, who is still on the team, in case anyone wasn't paying attention at the trade deadline, 5 of 9, just 2 of 6 from deep, but he gave you 5 rebounds, 3 assists in this game, came up with a block as well, and 14 points across his 25. Notably, though, look through these numbers, like all the numbers I just read about minutes. Nobody played over 30 minutes. 27 is the high mark. Jalen Wilson hit that as well, along with Keon Johnson. Everybody else in the mid-20s. So this is, expectations for me going forward is, and we saw this already leading up to the deadline. you're going to see a lot of bodies in there. It's going to be a lot of opportunities. Sometimes against bad teams like Charlotte, you're going to get wins. You have to be prepared for that, and we'll see how they fare when they go up against some of this different competition, because the Nets do have coming up on their schedule, taking my time, already had this up, didn't have to wait, didn't have to look, no research needed, and Philadelphia 76ers, Cleveland, Philadelphia 76ers before they get Washington, and then OKC, right? So in theory, even though Philly's record says otherwise, 4 out of their next 5 games are going to be quality opponents. So we'll see how it goes. But this is a good win for them, good win for Jordi, and some nice sample sizes for key players on the Nets.
It's funny. It's like one of these things, we talk about this many times, is that this push and pull of having a team that's bought in and professional and, is understanding the right things to happen. And then not exactly sure who's going to be around from that team going forward because they're going to have a ton of draft picks here. This kind of is, they talk for years about culture. This kind of is culture. This is kind of part of it. Culture has always been culture to me. What do we always say? Culture is, expectations over wins, right? Or something, or wins over expectations or something like that. Yeah, that's what it is. Right. So the more wins you have over where the expectation is, then you have positive culture, right? Of
course.
So the season went, and maybe just to wrap it back to the beginning here. Oh, this is the best in the business stuff right here. Watch what I'm about to do here. To wrap it back to the beginning. Yeah, watch this. So to go back to the beginning, when the season win total is 18.5 or 17.5, 18.5, 19.5, and you're at 19 wins through February 11th before we even get to the All-Star break, then your culture is good, right? The expectation was 19 wins. You're at positive culture right now, right? We're at neutral. We're net neutral culture, projecting for insane culture because just because everyone thought it was going to be this. And they've well exceeded expectations, even sending, Dennis Schroeder out and sending Dorian Finney-Smith out. And I know they brought D'Lo back in and everyone went crazy about that. But, bringing these guys in that are going to be professional every night. And if you're professional and you play hard, you just can't only win 9 games. It's impossible. Yeah. If you're gonna
proof of it,
just be chucking from the rafters like the Wizards are every night when it's the Kuz and Pool show. Or when it's LaMelo Ball plays every once in a while, and then when he does play, it's let Melo cook time. Or these other teams or the Jazz who sit their guys every other game.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe they have a better chance at Cooper Flag, and they do. But and maybe we want to say it comes at a cost. It sounds like insane copium to say this, by the way. I get it, but I also think that it is important long-term to establish this other stuff, even though that other stuff isn't as tangible as getting a bunch of, getting Cooper Flag.
Yeah.
Right.
Get in the comments. Cause I think I feel like I've been kind of saying this occasionally. I think you framed it really well there. Get in the comments about it. Let us know if you think that Doug and I are now officially going the wrong way when it comes to looking at what the season means and what wins mean relative to getting those top picks and having maybe a superstar in your club. We'll have to see how the fan base reacts.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube and also subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. Number one way to help the show, totally free for you, but it's really going to help us. Subscribe wherever you listen.
What does your heart tell you? And that is J. Tolkien.
Oh, I've heard of him. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.